Hey friends! I experimented with concrete for the first time and attempted to make a spoon rest, but failed. I also took my shot at making a charcuterie board, but I failed at that as well. There were just way too many holes in the concrete for that to be sanitary. I did, however, find a great solution for getting this large crystal up off the ground and making it easier to be able to vacuum around. In this video, I'm going to show you the experiments I did with concrete and some of the things that I learned along the way. Alright, let's do this. I've heard that melamine boards are a great material to use when working with concrete, so I used it for making my mold as well as the bottom board that I attached all my molds to. I cut out 6 identical pieces with 30-degree angles on either ends to create my hexagon mold. I wanted to be able to disassemble this mold as easy as possible when it came time to taking the concrete out, so I figured if I pre-drilled everything and then drilled it all together with screws, it would make it easier come time to taking it all apart. I just used a thin bead of wood glue to hold down the mold to the melamine board, and then just gave it some light pressure to hold it down. I wanted to experiment with a pass-fail. I made these wood hexagons constructed of just wood glue, and I figured it would be a good experiment to do a deep pour. I got a little ahead of myself and ended up just gluing it down with a thin bead of glue like I did with the other hexagon. I wish that I had made the step to adding paste wax to the inside as well as some silicone to seal the bottom edge. You'll see what ends up happening later when I actually pour the concrete. Speaking of getting ahead of myself, I did the same thing here by just adding the silicone, and I forgot the step of adding the paste wax. Once it had dried, I tried to clean it out and it was just a mess, so I ended up peeling everything back, cleaning it all out, and starting over fresh with paste wax. Once the mold had received a healthy coat of paste wax, I went back and revisited that silicone situation. The idea behind the silicone is it'll give a beveled edge to the mold. I still ended up having so much room left over on this melamine board that I figured it'd be a waste to leave it empty. So I cut a couple more pieces and made a couple more hexagons. With these molds, I experimented by using just a little bit of wood glue and tape to construct them together. I also wanted to do something fun with this experiment by using some hexagon tile in these molds. I just used my utility knife to cut out some of the pieces that I wanted to work with. Then I played around with how I wanted them to sit inside the mold. I had to remind myself that they'd be sitting upside down when I actually cemented them in. I just repeated the same process of using a thin bead of wood glue to hold down the mold to the melamine board and a little bit of pressure. I want to be able to pop these off easily come disassembly time. This time I remember to use the paste wax first and add a healthy coat to the molds before coming in with the silicone. I tried a little experiment with the smaller hexagon by using an all-purpose white silicone instead of the black to see if there was any difference. While the silicone dried, I glued down the hexagon tiles upside down using just a little dab of super glue to keep it in place. And I used an individual tile to help for spacing. So I'm working out my game plan before pouring the cement. I want to do just about a half pour on these shallow ones. And the wood one I want to leave about a 1/4 inch to the top so I can hammer out the mold. And then with this one I want to go all the way flush to the top. So because this was my first time working with concrete, I did a lot of research, which really just meant I went to YouTube and watched every one of my girl Rachel Metz's videos working with concrete, because honestly, she's my go-to when it comes to those types of things. I've linked all her videos in my description. Now, this is the point where I probably should have stopped, but I didn't. I added more. And then I got distracted because my little buddies decided to come along. They were very curious on what was going on. And I forgot to add more water at this point. So I decided to just push on and add all of this to the mold. The consistency didn't seem like an issue up until it came to pouring it into the deep pour, which I had to just kind of maneuver it and wedge it in there like silly putty. Remember when I said my game plan was to leave a 1/4 inch at the top so I could hammer it out? Yeah, apparently I'd forgot that. I was really concerned I wasn't going to get enough cement in between the tiles, so I really made sure to pack it down on that first one. But then I realized I might be pushing too much, so on the other one I gave a little bit lighter of pressure when pushing down on the cement. Then I came in with this plastic smoothing tool to even out any of the rough edges. A tip I learned from my girl Rachel is she said to use a reciprocating saw without the blade to vibrate out any of the air that's locked in the cement. I did notice that the wood form was not holding up as well as the ones that I had actually sealed. I could see air bubbles forming on the surface, so I knew it was working. However, I got a little concerned when I noticed how much liquid was leaking out of the wood mold, so I decided to stop and let it dry overnight. I'd seen a lot of different ways to adding wood legs to cement. However, I wanted to do a little experiment of my own with this hardware that I had found. I noticed right away though they didn't sit flat, but I had an idea of how I could give a little angle using a shim piece. I measured and marked out where I wanted the legs to go, mixed up a little slurry. I used some super glue to glue the metal shim to the hardware and then the slurry around it to keep it in place. A little light vibration with the reciprocating saw to get any excess air bubbles out, and then I was golden. Or was it? So I'm glad I checked this before this dried. I screwed one in to see how it looks. I went to the wrong angle. This needed to go that way. So I gotta fix this before this dries. Luckily they popped out of place pretty easily and I was able to still see my pencil marks. I made a new slurry and at this point I just gave up on using the gloves and used my hands to put it back into place. I let that sit and I moved on to disassembling the other molds that had fully cured. The molds that I used paste wax and silicone released extremely easy with little to no pressure. In some spots I had to use a hammer to tap it out lightly to release the mold and to release it from the bottom melamine board. As for the experiment between the black and white silicone, they both gave a nice beveled edge to the mold. A little bit of cement made it underneath one of the tiles, so I used a sharp razor blade to scrape away the excess cement and make the top flush. I used some acetone and a paper towel to clean off the super glue that was left behind from gluing the tile down to the melamine. So I learned a lot with this project. I really love how the tiles turned out. Unfortunately, with the air bubbles, it's just not food grade safe. And that one tile I actually chipped a little bit out when I got a little aggressive with the scraping. So less is more. Learning lesson. Speaking of learning lessons, this one was just a pain altogether. I knew that I was going to destroy the mold when getting out the cement. However, I didn't realize I was going to have to do so much prying and pulling, and it came to a specific point right here where there was no going back. Once I broke it, I broke it. I can fix this. I actually just saw my buddy Mike from Modern Builds do a kintsugi repair on a toffee table. I'll show you that later. But this guy was ready to be pulled out of the mold. So I unscrewed it and popped it out fairly easily. Once I realized that it was ready to go, I was eager to see if those legs were going to hold up the weight. So I screwed them in, flipped it over, and voila, she held the weight. I came in with sandpaper to try to smooth out the underside and sand off any of the rough edges that were left behind from the concrete. Now it's time to do a little repair action. I found this heavy-duty construction adhesive, and I basically just spread it around like I would cream cheese on a bagel, and then smushed it together. The top end's heavy enough to leave enough weight, and I let it sit overnight. Now's when I experimented with the kintsugi repair, the art of embracing damage. There's a lot of great videos on YouTube on how to do this repair, and I've linked some of my favorite in the description. I found that using the gold leaf paint was my favorite. After that, I gave a quick oil finish to the wooden legs. I let that dry and moved on to adding some cork backing to the Hexagon. I'm not sure what to call these since they're not going to be a charcuterie board and it's not going to be a spoon tray. I'm still kind of up in the air of what I'm going to actually use these for. I used a heavy-duty spray adhesive on the backside of the court and on the cement, let it sit for a couple seconds, and then adhered them together. And then I just repeated the process with the other two. All right, let's see how the experiments turned out. All in all, not bad. So even though I had a couple failed attempts with the cement, I wasn't able to get a charcuterie board and a spoon tray, I'm still really proud of how some of these experiments turned out, and I learned a lot about cement along the way that I'll definitely be experimenting with in the future. Did you learn something? Is there something that you would have done differently? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment. Till next time, friends, thanks again.